In this example, I want to go ahead and look at the logging function about how to get data in and out of a function and how you might debug a function inside of Lambda. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new function called CloudWatch function. Okay, and CloudWatch is the logging platform that's built into AWS. So I'm going to call this my CloudWatch function, and I'm going to go ahead and create that function. Okay, and what I want to do with this function is I want to get into some detail about how I would manage data if I'm not necessarily the recipient of this response. So for instance, if I were to add a trigger, and the trigger would be some kind of event that happens inside the AWS ecosystem that would then cause this function to execute. Okay, so the way I want to handle this is I want to add a trigger that's going to then cause this function to execute. And that trigger is going to be me uploading an object to an S3 bucket. Okay, so I have this Brian's Madison College demo bucket right here. It's empty by default, but what I want to happen is anytime I upload an object to this bucket, I want it to then trigger my CloudWatch function. Okay, and then I want to see what actually gets passed in to our function definition. So we're going to get this event argument. So in the past, if you looked at the hello world example of this, we looked at this event argument and the data that was passed in the event argument came from our test function. Okay, so we could do that. But in this case, I want this event argument to actually come from the fact that our code was triggered as a result of an object getting uploaded to S3, which triggered our function, and then data got passed in about that S3 object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a trigger. My source is going to be S3. Okay, and then I'm going to choose my bucket. So Brian's Madison College demo. The event types, so by default, it's all object create events. So that's this one right here. So anytime I create an object in S3 in that particular bucket, I could also have deletes, I could have restore from Glacier, so all sorts of different S3 events. But I'm going to say anytime an object is created, I'm going to trigger this function. So all object create events. Okay, and I guess I don't know why it selected all these others, but all object create events. I can put a prefix there, so maybe I only care about when it happens to the images or a particular file extension or anything like that. I have to acknowledge their warning, okay? And then I'm going to add that trigger. Okay, and now you'll see in my function overview that this trigger got added and it's connected to my function now. The other thing you'll know the other thing that you'll notice is if I go to permissions, it also modified my role. So if I go ahead and look at the role, by me adding that trigger, it did add the ability for my function to then be connected to S3. That does not happen by default if I'm just strictly writing code. That happened as a result of me adding the trigger. Okay, so because I added the trigger, now my function is able to connect to S3. But if I was just writing code and I was connecting to S3 through code, not through a trigger, that role permission would not have been changed. Okay, so now my function is going to execute, and what I want to do is I don't care about any of the code that they had there for their template. What I want to do is I want to see what the event arguments actually are. So I'm going to return the event arguments. Okay, that's what I actually want to do is I want to see what actually gets passed in to my function when I create a new object in my S3 bucket, so I can maybe infer a relationship, right? So a user uploads a picture, I want to associate that picture in a relational database or in a Dynamo database to say, hey, that user that uploaded it is also the owner of that picture. Okay, so I'd create some kind of relationship in my data store, whether that's a NoSQL database or a relational database. Okay, and in order to get that information, I'm going to have to look at this event argument. So what information did I actually get when the user uploaded a picture? Okay, so I want to look at what that event argument actually looks like. Okay, so if I go out to the web and I go to do a image search, so let's say I want a Brewers logo. Okay, so this one looks fine. I'm going to save the image. I'm going to call it Brewers. I'll get a couple other Cubs. Save that image. And then Cardinals. Right, so I'm assuming that we'll do this a couple times. Okay, so I'm just saving those images on my desktop. And what's going to happen is I'm going to upload the Brewers logo. Okay, so I add the file. I upload the Brewers logo. Okay, eventually you'll see that the Brewers logo is updated, just happened. And I want to look at my function and see what actually happened. Well, I didn't have any code on the other end of this function so that I could actually grab the event details. Okay, so what ends up happening is I invoked the function, or the function was triggered as a result of me uploading the Brewers logo. I returned this event, but there was nothing to receive the data that was in that event. So I'm out of luck. Now it's gone. Okay, so I had a return value in my function, but I didn't capture it anywhere. Okay, so it becomes a problem. So instead, what I'm going to do is I actually want to be able to look at that, and I'm going to use console.log, and I'm going to log the event. Now, my guess is most of you have looked at console.log before. And when you think of console.log, you're probably thinking, oh, I'm just going to right click. I'm going to go to the developer tools. I'm going to go to the console, at the console.log. Okay, so I'm going to go into this developer tools console. Okay, the console.log that I'm looking at in Lambda is different. So this console.log statement is not referring to my developer tools. Okay, so if you have taken a basic JavaScript class, you've probably seen this console.log, and you've looked at the developer tools inside your browser, and you've looked at the console in the developer tools to kind of debug your application. And I'm telling you now that this console.log is different. The reason being is in that intro to JavaScript coursework that you might have done, or look at JavaScript, what you were really looking at was client-side JavaScript. Okay, so client-side JavaScript meaning JavaScript that runs inside of your browser, right? And your browser has built-in support for JavaScript. So what ended up happening is you wrote some JavaScript, it got sent to the client, and it executed on the client's machine, and inside of their browser was where it executed, and you were able to then access that console. Okay, the JavaScript that we're dealing with here is Node.js, which is a little bit different than client-side JavaScript. This is server-side JavaScript, and what it really means is that it's running as Node.js. It's running JavaScript on the server, not on the client's machine, not in the client's browser. So when I do a console.log here, I'm not talking about the developer tools console. I'm talking about a different console. And console.log in this case is going to refer to CloudWatch. Okay, so when I do a console.log, I'm logging whatever event details came in, and I want to take a look at what those event details are. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy this. Okay, so I've deployed it. So I have two different versions of my function. The first one was just returning the event. And the second one, now I'm logging the event, and then I return the event. What's going to end up happening is I'm going to go ahead and upload another logo. So right now I've uploaded the Brewers logo. I'm going to upload the Cubs logo. Okay, so I upload the Cubs logo. That should trigger my Lambda function, my CloudWatch function, because I have that trigger in place. And now I actually want to see what that event argument looked like. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the monitor, and then I can view CloudWatch logs. So this opens CloudWatch, which is another service in AWS. But specifically, since I'm in CloudWatch for this Lambda function, when I view CloudWatch logs, it's going to give me the CloudWatch logs for my specific function. So you'll notice that there's two different log streams. The first one from when I first created the function, and then the second one when I actually added the console.log. So the second one is the important one. Every time I modify the function, I'm going to get a new log stream. Okay, so I don't need to keep these Like the first one is kind of irrelevant to me, so I can delete it. But now the latest one that we just looked at is going to have our event details. Okay, and you'll notice if I look through this right here, I can kind of see it off to the right. It's kind of hard to look at, but you'll notice that I can kind of pick it up pretty quickly. So right here, if I expand this, I get details about this event argument. So it's going to show me the records. So it's an object, it's a JSON object. That's what those curly braces are indicating. And inside that object, there's a collection of records. There's only one record because I only uploaded one file. Okay, so records is an array. So the event is this whole object. So I can say event.records, uppercase, to talk about this array. And then I want to look at the first record because there is only one record. And then really I care about this S3 object, okay, because that's really where it's going to have details about the fact about the file that I uploaded. Okay, so the way I'm going to do this is the event. That's what I logged. Okay, that's that object. And then I want dot records because that's the attribute name. And then I want add index 0 because I want the first object in the array. That gets me to this object right here. And then that object is going to have an S3 attribute. Okay, so the way I'm going to log this, if I go back over to my code, is I can do event.records at index 0, and then I'm at the S3 object. That's what I want to actually log. I want to see the details about that S3 object, the file that I uploaded. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy it. Okay. And now I'm going to go ahead and upload another file. So I'll upload the Cardinals logo. So here goes the Cardinals logo. It's going to, again, trigger my Lambda function. Okay, my Lambda function was modified again, right? So my Lambda function was modified. If I go back over to CloudWatch, I go back over to that CloudWatch function. Now you'll see I have a second log stream again because I just deployed a new version of my Lambda function. And in my new Lambda function, you'll notice that I have an error. Okay, and the error that I have is I have this unexpected token. Okay, and I'm not really sure what's going on here, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change this. So I'm going to log event.records. Okay, so I'm just going to log event.records, and I'm going to upload over the Brewers logo. Okay, so I'm going to upload the Brewers logo again. That should trigger my function again. Okay, so now if I go back over to my logs, I should have a third log. Okay, so there's my third log. And now you'll notice the record shows up. Okay, and now I'm getting some additional detail about my S3 object. So that looks okay. Life's good there. So now I want to go back over to my function again, and I want to say records at index 0 because records is an array. You can see that here. Okay, so that's what that square brackets indicates. So I'm going to deploy this again. Okay, so now I've deployed that new code. I'm going to go ahead and upload the Cubs logo. I'll just overwrite the file. And I just want to make sure that I've deployed this, and it looks like I have. So I've uploaded the Cubs logo a second time, which should cause me to get another version of my CloudWatch function. Okay, so that's right here. And now you'll notice that I have an object. So this is records at index 0. And now once I have that records at index 0, I'm going to go to the .s3. I want this S3 object, but you'll see that I already have the details that I care about. I have this object. I have the key, which is the file name, how big it is, stuff like that. But I should be able to go to that S3 object. Okay, so I deploy it. I just want to look at that S3 object. I don't care about the rest of the details, even though maybe I do care about the rest of the details, but I'm just going to go to the S3 object. I'm going to upload another file, so I'll upload the Cardinals logo a second time. Okay, so I just uploaded the Cardinals logo for a second time. I should get a new log in CloudWatch again. So there's my 5th log in CloudWatch. And now you'll see I'm getting undefined here. And I'm not really sure why. I think a lot of times it takes a second for me to actually have those code changes deployed. So I'm going to try to upload the Brewers logo now after this has had a second to deploy my code. Okay, so now I shouldn't have a new log because I didn't actually change my code, and it's still saying undefined, so I'm not positive why it's saying undefined. I know it was giving me an error the first time, and I kind of got there when I didn't include the S3 object. So here's my data. I should be able to ask what this S3 object is and just get this object right here. But right now I'm not getting that, and I'm not sure why. I actually ran through this example earlier and had the same issue where I couldn't concatenate those attributes, and I got to this point and I was able to see all the data that I needed. But earlier when I went through the demo, I was able to see all the way to this S3 object, and now I'm not sure why I'm not able to see that S3 object. So I don't know if that code's not getting deployed correctly, but basically, it's kind of unimportant at this point because I can see all my data, but I do want to kind of convey the fact that we are able to see our incoming object data. That's kind of the important takeaway here, is that when I get this S3 trigger that's going to trigger my function, the data that is getting handed off as a result of S3 triggering my function is part of this event object sending the data in. And then I can log that data, and I have to log the data because I don't have anything on the other side of this to actually capture the return value. Okay, so the data gets passed in, I can work with the data, I can do the things I need to do with the data, but ultimately I don't have anything that's going to handle the return object. Okay, so in order to actually look at it, I'm going to use console.log, and console.log is actually going to take us over to CloudWatch. Okay, that's the important takeaway. Okay, so then once I get over into CloudWatch, then I can see the data related to this object. Okay, the other thing that I could do if I wanted to actually test this out is, let's say I was going to test this. I'm going to configure a test event, and I'm going to call this my CloudWatch test. Right now the template is a hello world template where I have some event JSON. I could go ahead and say I want to do an S3 put, and then it fills in all the details about our incoming event object is going to look like. You'll notice this looks a lot like the data that we just had inside of CloudWatch. Okay, and usually what ends up happening is if I was going to do this, if I actually want to mimic this, I have to have the correct bucket name. Okay, so Brian's Madison College demo is my bucket name right here and here. And then my key name is going to be brewers.jpg. I think that's the file name. So if I'm looking at my desktop, it's brewers.jpg. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save that. And then I can invoke this function with a test, so I don't actually have to upload a file. And you can see that I'm going to get this response. This is the return value. Okay, so that's another way I could have tested it, but it's kind of fictitious because I'm not actually uploading a file. So in this case, I actually am able to capture the return value by looking at this test result. Okay, so now I'm seeing this event object that's getting returned. That's what the execution results are showing me. But most of the time in a production environment, what's going to happen is the user is going to upload the file to S3, and I'm not going to have an opportunity to capture the return value. So I have to look at that return value through CloudWatch. Okay, so this is just a tool that you'll use with Lambda for debugging to see kind of what are your incoming parameters, what are your outgoing parameters. I can use that console.log statement to actually look at what's going on. Like for instance, maybe I'm getting halfway through my function and then for some reason it's crashing or I'm not getting the expected return value. I might want to put some log statements on in my function to track down how far I'm getting and what's the state of my function at a point in time. CloudWatch is where I'm going to look to see those console.log statements. Okay, so just another tool to debug AWS Lambda.